Bless
I don't know how long it's been. Good morning. How's everyone? Hanging in there? It's freezing outside, though it's warm in here. It's so cool out there. I like it. It keeps us awake, hopefully. Not in here, but out there. We should go out there. I'm gonna pass this around. So I'm no longer gonna take attendance as of today. So what I'm gonna do is pass around the sheets. And I just printed this maybe 20 minutes ago. So if your name's not on here, it means you're not enrolled in the class. So make sure you can check in with me so we can figure out why. And feel free to make any changes if you don't like the name that's on here, or you want to go by something else, cross it off and I'll update it for next week. But you can just either sign or initial, just something to indicate that you're here. It's not worth any points, but it does help me keep track of who's coming, and that tends to come in handy. And yeah, we're in week 3, which is kind of hard to believe. We're already week 3 of the semester. It's flying by. It's practically spring break, right? Not really. It's almost February, either way. So make sure you sign that. It'll just hopefully make its way around the room. If it skips you for some reason, you can sign it at the end. Again, it's not worth points, but please try and do that every day. And then we'll pick up with our next chapter. We're on to chapter 2, where we'll look at models of abnormality. So we looked at how do we define what's normal versus abnormal, and how do we view abnormality in the past. Now we're going to look at a bunch of different ways that we can view abnormal behavior. And we have this chapter and then one more, and then we finally get into the disorders. So we're getting there. We're getting closer to the disorders. So let's see here. So what we'll look at, as I said, is a bunch of different models. And when we talk about this term model, let me just make sure I hit record here. Pretty sure I did. Yes. When we talk about models, we're looking at a way to view something, right? A set of assumptions or concepts that are going to help us to explain and interpret whatever it is that we're looking at. And in our case, we're looking at abnormal behavior and mental illnesses. So we're going to use these models to kind of spell out some basic assumptions and then set guidelines for how we view something and how we treat it. And if you've taken other psych classes, you could view these as models or lenses or theories or paradigms. All those kind of capture the same stuff. They overlap with each other. They conflict with each other. There isn't necessarily like one best model, but sometimes certain models will explain a disorder better than others. So when we talk about each disorder, what we'll do is we'll say, you know, we can explain it from this model the best, or maybe this model helps us to dictate treatment. So we'll look at some of the kind of big guiding principles for each of these different models. And then you'll see them again all semester, right? As we get into the actual disorders, these models will come back every time. So again, know that there isn't a best one. They all kind of help us to view things differently. But if we, for example, let's take something like depression, right? We could say that depression is caused by something biological, which we'll talk about in a moment. And if we think it's caused by something biological, then we're going to treat it biologically. We could say it's caused by maybe negative thinking patterns, in which case then we're going to tackle those thinking patterns. So these kind of help us to explain it and also guide us when it comes to how we're going to treat it. So what I'll do for each one of these is I'm going to write the model and then like a couple of key terms that go with it up on the board just to help you keep them straight. But we'll go through, again, each one kind of looking at some of the main ideas. So the first one, and I'll write these over here, is the biological, sometimes called medical model. Biological or medical model. And from this perspective, we're looking at physical causes, right? Like the ones that are up here, right? So from a medical model or a physical or biological model, what are some of the physical causes that might lead to a mental illness, right? And there's a lot of these are really common ones, and we'll talk about them throughout the semester. But there's a couple of different things that we can see as like common culprits from a biological perspective. One of them is brain anatomy, right? A lot of different structures within the brain. We're not going over that too much in here other than to mention them when they're relevant. But there are different structures in the brain that can cause problems. Let's say there's an issue with a structure in the brain that's been damaged. Maybe that makes it where the brain isn't functioning properly. We'll talk about brain circuits when we get to depression in a couple of weeks. There are clusters of brain structures that work together that can cause problems, right? And cause people to be more likely to be depressed, for example. So brain anatomy is a big culprit, but probably the biggest culprit is the second bullet, right? I should probably switch them because it's the most relevant most of the time. Brain chemistry. Brain chemistry plays a huge role in mental illness, specifically neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are little chemical messengers that are released by neurons, and they play a huge role in our functioning both properly and improperly. Can anyone give me an example of a neurotransmitter? Who knows a neurotransmitter? Yeah. Dopamine, huge one, right? Really big for our purposes. What else? Can anyone think of another one? Yeah. GABA, I love it. Did you have a different one? Norepinephrine, there's another really big one. Anyone have it? Starts with an S. Yeah? Serotonin, you were very excited. I like that. Anyone else? Any other ones you can think of? Yeah. It's a good guess. It's a hormone, right? Very similar, but it goes to the blood instead of the nervous system. Acetylcholine, there's a whole ton of these. Glutamate. We'll talk about them throughout the course of the semester, but neurotransmitters are really, really key when it comes to mental illness. And I'm going to draw you the most beautiful neuron ever. I'm setting the stage because I'm an awful artist. It's going to be pretty good. I mean, maybe it could be worse. My kids know not to ask me to draw things for them. They're like, I'll ask my mom. Okay, so here's my neuron. And sorry. Okay, so here's like our little nucleus. Here's the dendrites on one end. Here's the little terminal buttons on the other. I mean, it's all right, right? There's a beautiful one behind here that you can't see that I drew earlier. So neuron, right? And imagine most of you, how many of you took intro psych, just out of curiosity, right? Almost all of you, if not all of you, that's great. So when neurons communicate with each other, right, there's two pieces to that. It's electrochemical communication. So when neurons communicate, it's this electrochemical process. The electrical piece are made up of these tiny little things called ions, which exist inside and outside of a neuron. Yeah. And whenever a neuron is going to fire or send a message to another neuron, little gates open up. Let's do this through a high-tech process here. Little gates open up, right? And these ions are going to flow in and out, changing the electrical composition of the neuron. When it hits a certain point, it fires or it sends an action potential to communicate with the neuron next to it. Now, tricky, neurons aren't connected to each other, right? So there's this tiny little gap in between them called the synapse. And this is where the chemical piece comes in right here. So the electrical piece are the ions. The chemical piece are the neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters are housed in these tiny little buttons at the end of each neuron. And then when a message comes, they're released and they float across to keep that message going. Now, if we have too much of a neurotransmitter, it can cause issues. Not enough of it, it can cause issues. So dopamine, for example, too much dopamine is thought to cause a lot of the symptoms of schizophrenia. Serotonin, huge culprit for depression, right? Glutamate and GABA play a big role in anxiety disorders. So if these neurotransmitters and this whole process isn't working properly, it causes issues. Right, so neurotransmitters are probably one of the biggest culprits, and then they're going to dictate treatments, which are medications, to help put them back into balance. I mentioned brain circuits with brain anatomy. There's also circuits within the brain that play a big role in how we function and certain structures working together. Genetics is another big one here, right? Our genes play a big role. A lot of mental illnesses have a genetic component to them. You can inherit it from a parent, along with some viral infections, especially during pregnancy, prenatal influences. Biological stuff plays a really big role, and you'll see this model come up over and over and over again, especially when it comes to this piece and the neurotransmitters, sometimes the brain circuits and genetics and so on. So if we believe that it's a biological culprit, then we're going to try and treat the disorder biologically. And sometimes we combine these models together, which we'll talk a lot about over the semester. But the number one biological treatment is medication. Medications for everything. Again, we mentioned this before in the first chapter. If somebody has too much dopamine, I can give you a drug to reduce the amount of dopamine. Not enough serotonin, I can give you a drug to increase serotonin and try and turn that around. So lots and lots of medications. That is by far the most common biological or medical treatment that we use. If medications don't work, or if somebody isn't responsive to medication, which happens, then sometimes we consider things like brain stimulation methods. Right? These are never the first line of defense. Like we would never start you off with like electroconvulsive therapy or transcranial magnetic stimulation. But if you weren't responsive to medication, we might consider doing something to stimulate the brain, stimulate those brain circuits in some way. And the old standby is electroconvulsive therapy. There are newer and better models, which we'll talk about later in the semester, but this is the one that's been around the longest. And I won't ask you this, but it's just a little history about ECT. So we've been doing some kind of brain stimulation for hundreds and hundreds of years. We used to do it with substances. And for the first time in 1934, we decided to try an electrical current. And again, I won't ask you that year or anything, but in 1934, we passed 55 amps through a patient who had schizophrenia. So we had a young man who hadn't spoken a word in months, right? He was catatonic. And they decided to pass an electrical current through his brain, 55 amps for 2 seconds. He had a massive seizure, which is the intent. He sat up, swore at them and said, like, what the F are you trying to do to me? They considered it a massive success. And we've been refining it ever since. Now, for lots and lots of years, we had no idea why this worked, but we did it anyway. And a big thing that we've learned over the last like 10 to 20 years is that it activates some of those brain circuits that we talked about for depression. It increases the activity in the frontal lobe and a few other regions that we'll talk more about later. But this young man like started talking as a result of this massive seizure. And so we wanted to understand it. We've been refining it. And there are some newer methods, but this one is definitely still used in people who are unresponsive to medication or have really, really severe depression. And there's a lot of great like classic psych movies. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. If you haven't, I would recommend it. Some of you are nodding. It's old, but it's like such a classic. I have a little clip from that to show you what ECT can look like. ECT or shock therapy, kind of going by the same thing, seizure, but they pass that electrical current through, causing what's called a clonic seizure, which means that you typically lose consciousness for a matter of seconds, right? And again, something about that current is thought to reboot and reactivate some parts of the brain. And we use this a lot, right? A lot of people undergo things like electroconvulsive therapy or TMS. It's an outpatient procedure. You can drive yourself there. They encourage you to have someone drive you home, but like they typically do this over a course of 6 to 12 treatments over a matter of weeks. And again, never would this be the first line of defense, but it is something that's really helpful. It does have a lot of side effects, but it can be really helpful for depression or unresponsive, people who are unresponsive to medication. Are there any, I don't know, any thoughts or comments, questions, anything at all about ECT or anything related to this? I always want to say it's shocking that we still do it, but that's an awful pun, or the best pun. I don't know, one or the other, but it is still something that is very commonly practiced. Though, as I mentioned, there are some much better, much less intense methods that we'll talk about later. In really, really rare cases, we might consider something like a psychosurgery, something to repair an area of the brain, if it's possible, right? If someone has damage to the brain and we can do something surgically about it, we would. Right, but this is pretty common. We don't perform a lot of psychosurgeries, much more common to do medication, and then maybe explore brain stimulation if needed. Yeah.
And then I went home and I talked to my dad about it because I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Was it the frontal lobotomy?
Yeah.
Okay, do we still do that?
No. No, and it was really popular in the 1900s, like very popular, like disturbingly so. But
I don't know if you know the song. The same thing, rather than the bottle in front of him and frontal lobotomy is just his like sibling or something.
Interesting.
They like both had disorders, but he just went to drinking while this other sibling was drinking water.
Yeah.
That's what made him interested in this conversation, because he knew a song about it.
Sure.
But I just was curious if we still did that procedure.
No, yeah. So a traditional like psychosurgery, for example, I always think if there's this guy, his name was Joe, who had his corpus callosum severed. That would be like one example. So sometimes people, when they have really intense seizures, they pass back and forth from the right to left side of the brain. So you can sever the connection between the two halves and isolate the seizures. Like that would be a psychosurgery. A lobotomy would have been one years ago, but traditionally what that meant was drilling a hole into the frontal lobe and causing a significant amount of brain damage. So we've thankfully learned so much. We don't do them anymore, but they were popular, especially in like the 1930s and 40s. And then we really thankfully outgrew them and have moved on to more like refined stuff. Yeah. If you find the song, you should send it to me. Right?
He sent it to me, I just didn't find it.
Sure. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh yeah, there's a couple over here. Yeah.
Lobotomized 80s.
Really?
So
In the 80s?
yeah,
Oh my goodness. Okay.
not all that long ago, and we're actually, probably more than 60s.
Yeah, that would make more
Yeah,
sense. Yeah.
and it's a mixed results.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a very like an unrefined procedure, right? And now we try and do things that are much more targeted, but the intent was there to try and help make people better. We just didn't know what we were doing, which is frightening. 60s would be more reassuring than the 80s, right? Yeah.
So I don't know if it was is there a possibility can you show to all of the academic non-technologies for the body means the things like that things. It was all just bad, but it's like a great example of outputs.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, disturbing and interesting show, right? We did so many awful things, we had no idea what we were doing. And those tanks and the lobotomies and strange, devices and procedures were really common for a lot of years. All right, again, most common here, medication, right? But these are all things that we could do if we believe that biological stuff is the culprit. From the next perspective that we'll move to, the psychodynamic or psychoanalytic model. This is Freud's model, and that's Freud here. You can tell it's him because he always has a cigar. Always, right? Always holding a cigar. Poor guy was so addicted to cigars, it actually is what killed him. He died of oral cancer from smoking cigars his entire life. He had something like 30 surgeries and kept smoking them anyway. And it was ultimately what killed him. But Freud and the psychoanalytic model. Yeah.
Sorry, I just think that's really funny. It's like
Yeah.
he talks about fixation.
Yep.
And like yet.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, so much of a double standard, right? So Freud would have said that anyone who was obsessed with like a cigar, he would have said that was incredibly phallic. Like everything with him was like phallic and sexually related. But for him, he would say sometimes a cigar was just a cigar. Like he definitely had a double standard, right? And he's like the most famous psychologist, and he died from addiction, like cancer that came from addiction. So, just a person, they couldn't overcome his fears and addictions that he had. But yeah, he definitely had a double standard, to say the least. So, psychoanalytic. So psychoanalysis literally means like an analysis of the mind or the psyche, right? And that's where the term comes from. And Freud talked a lot about the unconscious mind. He talked a lot about early childhood. And then we could add sexual and aggressive urges. Really interesting guy, really controversial theories, but he was kind of the first one to start everything, right? He was one of the first big people. So even though his ideas are super controversial and limited, he still has a really big place in the field, right? He's kind of the pioneer, and everybody who came after him built on what he put out there. So he talked a lot about things like the unconscious mind, the things that you aren't normally aware of, things that are buried deep down under the surface, not just below, but way deep down. Like right now, if you were to think about it, what you had for breakfast, right? Hopefully you had breakfast, right? Or something to eat this morning. But if you, a minute ago, you probably weren't thinking about that. But the second you think about it, it comes back into your conscious mind, right? That's what we would call the subconscious. And we sometimes use a metaphor of an iceberg. So here's my iceberg. Here's the water line. I feel like I should draw a Titanic, right? My kids are already talking about the cruise. My youngest is like, can we do King of the World on the front of the ship? Sure, right? Why not? Right? Go ahead. Okay, so there's the ship, there's the iceberg thing. I can't help myself. I want to draw like a soft serve machine somewhere on there. It's hiding. All right, but the tip of the iceberg, what you can see is what's conscious. And it's a very small amount, right? It's what you're thinking about right now, what you're aware of in this current moment. All of that would be your conscious mind. What's just below the water would be the subconscious, or sometimes called the pre-conscious, stuff that you're not thinking about, but you can bring up really quickly, like what you did yesterday, right? Or again, what you have for breakfast, or something that's like not overly important, but easy to recall. Freud was interested in what was way down here, the unconscious. Stuff that was buried back from your childhood, back from things that you had repressed or pushed down. And he talked a lot about this. He thought it was really, really important, and that it would come out and manifest in things like dreams and daydreams and Freudian slips, right? If you've ever had somebody or yourself maybe even said the wrong name or said the wrong thing, Freud said that was the unconscious mind coming out. I had a biology teacher in high school who always used to say orgasm instead of organism, like to the point where it was a little sleazy. Like he'd be like, this orgasm, sorry, I mean organism. Like he made it like so sleazy every time. Like, we know what you're thinking about, right? Because it would come out, it was the wrong word, right? Constantly. You ever look at someone and you say the wrong name? Freud would say it's because they were on your mind. Or you forget an appointment or something that you were supposed to do. He would say it's because you didn't want to go, right? He thought that every little thing in the unconscious was meaningful and important, and that this would come out in dreams, which he called the royal road to the unconscious, or again, Freudian slips, or even daydreams. And so the unconscious mind is something that he really wanted to access. A lot of dream interpretation and just talking, which we'll talk more about in a second. He also talked a lot about early childhood, the role of your parents. That whole like mom is the most important thing in the world comes from Freud, right? He would talk a lot about your mom and dad, right? And your biological parents, very like heteronormative in his theories, that you had a mom and you had a dad and you had two parents, right? That was the norm. Some of that coming from the time that he was doing this at, which was the late 1800s, early 1900s. He also talked a lot about sexual instincts and aggression, right? Very, very sexual ideas, falling in love with your mother, hating your father, the Oedipal complex, right? All these different stages that we go through. Super, super controversial ideas. But again, some of the first ones to really be proposed. So they've stuck around a very long time. One of his most famous concepts that applies to what we're talking about are the three central forces of personality. Freud talked a lot about what descriptive of our personality. These aren't parts of the brain. It's parts of the mind, which is a much more like lofty, abstract concept. But he said that these three parts need to exist in balance to avoid problems. The id is the one on the left. The id is your purely unconscious part of your mind. It operates on what he called the pleasure principle. It wants what it wants. I want it right now. To hell with the consequences. Not a single one of you are giving into your id right now. Like you wouldn't be behaving properly if you did. Like I'd be down at the donut shop, like eating 1 million donuts. Wouldn't have paid for them. Why would I? I'm going with the id, right? You would be just giving into whatever you want, right? It's that part of you that's just very, very driven by pleasure and like instant gratification, very, very primal and unconscious. If I skip the middle one for a minute, the superego is almost like the angel on your shoulder, right? So we have the devil on your shoulder and the angel on your shoulder, right? The superego is your conscience. It tells you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So my superego would probably be like, you shouldn't go to the donut shop and steal all those donuts and eat 50,000 donuts. That's bad for you and you'll go to jail and shouldn't, right? Little angel telling me what to do. And thankfully we have what's called the ego in the middle, which is kind of like the great compromiser, right? It's in touch with reality. It tries to mediate between the two. So my ego could say something like, all right, our class is done in like 45 minutes. I mean, I do have another one after this, but after that, if I wanted to, I could go to a donut store and buy like a donut, buy it, 1 or 2 donuts, not go to jail, not get sick, right? It's going to compromise. And most of us live here where we're constantly compromising between the extremes. If you are too id dominated, it gets you in trouble. You're aggressive, you're reckless, you're impulsive, right? Hot-headed maybe. But if you're too super ego dominated, you're anxious. You feel guilty all the time because you're constantly shoulding on yourself, right? You should this, shouldn't that. So you want to have balance between these three. And this is probably one of the most famous things that he came up with as it relates to what we're talking about in here. He also talked a lot about psychosexual stages of development and many, many other things. But this one's probably the most relevant for our purposes. In terms of his treatments, I have a video I want to play for you, and then we'll talk about these more. I have a little video that shows you what this type of therapy looks like. It's super old and super cheesy, but I think in a good way. I hope. We'll see what you think. But I think this video is really helpful. It shows you what psychoanalytic therapy looks like. It's a lot of talking, typically dream interpretation and dream analysis, and doing what's called free associating, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. You will learn how to flirt in this video. Not well, but still. Sitting behind him, right? That's very common in Freudian or psychoanalytic therapy. The therapist sits behind the patient or the client, out of sight, and therefore supposedly out of mind. The whole idea is that you're just going to talk. You're going to talk about anything and everything that comes to mind. You're not going to censor it in any way. That's something that Freud called free association, right? Talking about dreams would be very common within this perspective. Talking about connections and associations with things, your early childhood memories, anything that comes to mind is going to be relevant within psychodynamic therapy. By having the therapist behind you, it's thought that they pressure you less, that you might be more willing to just kind of talk. Freud was the first one to have a couch. He's the one who invented the idea of like a couch being part of therapy, because you laid on the couch away from the therapist and just talked. Right? And there's a couple of variations of free association. Sometimes it's just talking, anything that comes to mind. It can also be along the lines of like word association. Right, so a therapist can give you a word and you give them the first word or words that come to mind. That's very, very common. I have a clip of that. Let me play that for you too, just for fun. It's much more recent. Stops and thinks about it for a moment. Freud would say that's because that was so like laden with emotion and thought that it's something that we would probably have to go work through. And that's something that he was very well known for, having to work through things that come up. And this was a very, very long type of therapy. It's not very popular anymore. Elements of it might be used, but this type of therapy is the kind where you would go see this person like every day for an hour for years, right? I mean, this is a very, very long-winded, involved type of therapy. Insurance would never cover something like this now. Traditionally, if you're lucky, you can go every week, once a week, and sometimes more depending on the severity of what's going on. But this would traditionally be like a daily appointment for an hour or more. And so what happens is over time, you start to really develop a relationship with this therapist, right? Because you're seeing them so much. And that's something that he talked a lot about as well. But you would go through things that come up, especially going back to childhood, talking, lots and lots of talking. He used things like hypnosis and dream interpretation very, very commonly. And again, he would look at some of the things that might come up. Right? There's a very interesting term called transference that is very popular from this perspective. Because you see the therapist so much, in the end, you end up redirecting or transferring feelings that you have about people in your life onto the therapist. Super common. And I can tell you, I've experienced this on both ends of therapy, right? As a therapist, sometimes clients or patients will all of a sudden be pissed off at you for no reason. They're so mad at you and they're angry and they're bitter and they treat you like crap. And you're like, what did I do? I did nothing. Turns out they're mad at somebody in their life and they transferred or redirected onto you as a safe target. It's like classic projection and displacement. Very, very common from this perspective. I will take that any day over the other end. I'd rather someone be mad at me than like, you'd have clients that fall in love with you, right out of nowhere. Like I had this male client who out of nowhere started bringing me gifts and flirting with me. And I'm like, you are barking up the wrong tree in like every possible way here, buddy. And it was so awkward. Like, I'd rather someone be mad than that, like any day. He would bring me like desserts and like, you're not supposed to accept them, which is painful for me, right? I was like, oh, I want it so bad. I'll put it in the staff room and we can all share it. But you'd have people who did this, like this guy, he would call me like 20 times a day and leave me voicemails. And it turned out, so this was therapeutically relevant. I'm like, where is this coming from? At first, it really like put me off, but then it was like, okay, let's explore this. And it turned out he had fallen in love with his best friend's girlfriend. So somebody who was completely unavailable to him and forbidden to him, kind of like I was in every possible way, right? And so he redirected that onto me. And once we figured that out, thank God figured that out, right? It stopped, which was nice. And then we were able to explore it. Very common that people do this. Let's say from this perspective, that people had a really difficult childhood with their parents. They might look at a therapist as a mother figure, right? And have like motherly attachment related feelings to that therapist, or like fatherly feelings, whatever it might be. Very common to transfer feelings onto them because you're seeing them so frequently. They become a big part of your life. And Freud thought these feelings and these things that you transfer were very therapeutically relevant. And he also explored something called countertransference, the therapist feelings that they transfer onto their clients. Very common, let's say you have a therapist who's a parent. They might view a client in a very like childlike way and treat them like one of their children. That would be countertransference. So he explored this quite a bit in therapy, your feelings that you transfer onto them and the feelings that the therapist might transfer onto you as well. Again, very, very long-winded, long-lasting, and this isn't popular anymore, but we do use elements of it in parts of other types of therapy. Yeah.
Sometimes, like, you think you recognize somebody, would that be considered transference? Like, if you think you recognize them from like the previous, like, dating them prior?
It's more like the feelings that you would put onto someone. So like if you were really mad at someone in your life, you might take that out on your therapist, or really happy, you would take it out on them. It could be in a way, right? So maybe something about the therapeutic situation reminds you of something in your life. And so you connect the two a little bit. This can be an incredibly helpful thing, or it can get in the way, as you can imagine. And sometimes it does get in the way pretty badly. And other times it can be very, very, very helpful. Any other questions or thoughts about Freud and his therapy before we move on from it? I love dream interpretation as a side note. Like, it's a very big part of this theory. And probably my favorite like idea of Freud's, right? I love interpreting dreams. I find them so interesting and relevant. And sometimes they can be really, really meaningful. Other times they're incredibly random, right? They might just be an extension of your waking day. I go to sleep watching like a lot of food shows. So I have a lot of food dreams. I don't think they're overly meaningful as much as like I fell asleep watching Top Chef. So I dream that I'm on Top Chef. But it could be meaningful at the same time. It's kind of up to the therapist to figure that out, right? Is it random? Is it meaningful? Is it an extension? Mine's always like I end up on Top Chef and I'm in the final, and then I realize I can't cook because I can't. I don't know how to cook. Like I can bake desserts like nobody. Like I'm a really good baker, but I don't know how to cook. And I always end up on Top Chef and I'm like, oh, I don't know how to cook. I got a fool Tom. How am I going to do this, right? So interesting, kind of blending waking life with maybe something deeper. Freud would say it was deeper, always. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And Freud talked a lot about reoccurring beliefs, that it might be something that throughout your whole life you're running away from something, but that something will change in your dreams. And so what does that mean? And he would say that nothing is obvious in the dream. So you have to find out like hidden latent content, but like symbolic, what are you running away from? Right. Or it could just be like literally like there's a literal meaning to it, but he wouldn't have thought. He would have thought it was like some deep, meaningful thing. Yeah. Yeah, and there's some really cool dream interpretation websites that'll give you like common symbolic meanings, sleeps.com and dreammoods.com. I think are two of them. You can go on there and you can put in like running away, and it'll tell you what the common symbolic meaning of that is. But he would say it's more what it means to you. So you could kind of explore both. Yeah.
My old science teacher was like super against us buying in books about
Sure.
was like trying and looking up on websites. Because he was very much like, it's so different for each person.
Yeah.
Like a doorway for most people is like a new opportunity, whereas if you're a kid, a door fell and like,
Right.
like horrible. So it was like he was like super against us. He was like just journal it out and like write out and just like let your thoughts flow.
Yeah.
As to what you think.
Yeah. Yeah, and both I think are relevant, right? Because like you said, a doorway will have a common symbolic meaning, but it could mean something very different to you, right? I had a dream, I always use this example, I had a dream about the sun rising, but it was a pumpkin, right? And it was because, I'm pretty sure it was because I had a light up pumpkin in my window and I left it on. And so in my sleep, like it infiltrated my sleep in some way, right? And so there was the sun, but it was a pumpkin. Now, if you look up pumpkins in the dream dictionary, they symbolize change and transformation. Or it could have just meant that I dreamt about the pumpkin that was in my window, right? Like, so dreams can be so many things, but Freud would say that it's unique to you. He would have been very against like common symbolic meanings. It would have been, what does the pumpkin represent to you, or the doorway or running away or whatever it might be. Yeah. All right, next model. Very, very different than Freud's, like direct opposition to Freud's, the behavioral model. So I'll write that over here. This one is all about conditioning and experiences or learning. So Freud was all about stuff that was like very deep down that you can't access, the unconscious mind, thinking, talking, working through things. The behavioral model is all about like action and consequence. It's about conditioning. What can you see? What have we learned? That our actions, positive and negative, healthy, unhealthy, normal, abnormal, all of it, are learned by our experiences in life. That you can be conditioned into certain habits or behaviors or things that you do. And there's a couple of different types of conditioning. Most of you took intro psych, as I asked you a moment ago. There are kind of two main types. There's classical and there's operant. Classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning was founded by Pavlov. Right, and Pavlov was the one who did the experiments with dogs, right? And if you're not ringing, I was gonna say, if it's not ringing a bell, that's like the best. Again, another pun. I'm on fire with my puns today. Like he did the experiment with bells and dogs and salivating. Yeah, did you have a?
Julie Campbell, I had one
Mhm.
for intro to psych.
Yeah.
Also had her last semester, and she'd always say, like, does that ring a bell or stuff like that? And like, I immediately think of that.
Yep. Yeah, right. He was all about ringing a bell and presenting food, right? It's perfect. I have a little, just a quick reminder of what this looked like. This one tends to be more confusing than the other. So I have a little like overview of what he did. It's brief, but I think it might be helpful if you're searching through your mind, trying to remember what dogs. When he would present the dogs with food, they would salivate. He didn't have to teach that. That was an automatic response. And that tends to be the case with this, that you take something that was automatic and involuntary and you replace it with something else, right? So he would present the dogs with food. They would drool or salivate in excitement for the food. And then he started ringing a bell, presenting the food, ringing a bell, presenting the food, ringing a bell, presenting the food over and over and over again, repeatedly pairing them together until eventually the dogs would salivate to the bell instead of the food. Now, this is a principle that is often very like involuntary. or even almost automatically. You aren't always aware that this is happening. And so sometimes it can lead to interesting like responses and pranks. Like if you've ever seen that clip from The Office with the Altoid where he sticks his hand out and starts salivating, but he's not even aware that it's happening because it can be very involuntary and automatic in that way. People oftentimes learn things like phobias this way, right? Maybe two things become paired together and you develop a phobia with it. I have a colleague here who teaches part-time, and when she was younger, she got into a really awful car accident that almost killed her. And at the time on the radio was the song Eye of the Tiger. Every time she hears the song Eye of the Tiger, she breaks out into a sweat and expects something bad to happen because in her mind, she paired those two things together. This song, something bad happened, right? So the two become connected. And that happens sometimes with phobias with people. Whenever the power goes out, I feel a rush of panic, like instantly and automatically, because like in any scary movie, the power goes out. It's like the second the power goes out, bad things are going to happen. Here come the zombies, here comes whatever, like the ghosts, whatever's going to happen, the power goes out or flickers first, right? So the second the power flickers, like my palms sweat and I get scared. If you hear like an emergency alert sound, over the weekend, there was an Amber alert that went off on my daughter's phone and she started crying. The sound scared her so badly. And I was trying to explain conditioning to her. She's 10. She's all like, yeah, you know what? She didn't care, but I tried anyway. I was trying to do my psychology duty and she totally didn't care. But that's the idea behind this. You get this automatic involuntary response. And we can learn a lot of things this way, especially like mindlessly, like phobias and so on. Yeah.
Or like, I'm not sure if they're just different perspectives.
Sure.
Trauma responses,
Sure, it could be, they're very often connected, right? So phobias and trauma, let's say that you had like something really bad happen and there was a smell that was happening at the time, right? Whenever you smell that similar scent, you might have the same trauma response. Or maybe there was a certain event that happened. Every time you're near that or around that, it's going to trigger that response. So it's they're very connected, right? So people get these very involuntary reactions to stimuli that are often linked to trauma or fear or something that happened in their life. And then the idea is that you have to recondition them to get rid of that response. So it might be like exposing you to a sound and then nothing bad happens and doing it over and over again until that sound loses its power, right? If you have a food aversion, if any of you have a food that you eat that makes you wildly sick, then some of you nodding, that is classical conditioning. I always tell this story in my intro psych class. Some of you have probably heard it before. My mother-in-law has food poisoned me so many times at this point. So my partner and I have been together 20 years this August. Right, she's put up with me for a long time. 20 years, it's a long time. And so when we first started dating 20 years ago, her mom made chili, right? Made this big batch of chili. It smelled great. I was all excited. I like to eat, right? As I've talked about. And so I got this big bowl of it. I had a huge bowl. I spent the whole night sick. Everyone in the family sick, like all of us fighting over Tums and toilets and like just all of us violently ill. I don't know what she did, but she food poisoned all of us, right? And I should have learned then, but she has, oh my gosh, over 20 years. I mean, more times than I can count on two hands, like enough so that when she cooks, I'm terrified because I know I'm going to get sick. My odds of getting sick are high. She made Italian hamburgers a few months ago. It's as bad as it sounds like it would be. Like she put all these spices in the hamburger. She's like, they're Italian. I don't want to eat it, right? Whenever she cooks, I'm expecting it. Like I expect to get sick because she has food poisoned me so many times. And so chili, for example, I can't eat chili without my mouth watering in that bad way. Like the second I smell it, I feel sick. And so over time, over 20 years, I've slowly been getting rid of that association, right? And so you can get rid of these things that you connect with, but it can take a little bit of time. And again, every time she cooks, I feel like I'm going to die, right? It happens a good amount, like once a month, maybe. Like sure, it's coming up. I'll tell you before. Or if I'm randomly sick on, like, it's usually a Wednesday night, so I guess it wouldn't affect us. But if I'm randomly sick on a Thursday, that's probably what happened. But she does this a lot, and so I expect it. Right. And that's kind of what happens with this. You develop connections between things without necessarily knowing it. And I can add one more thing here. It causes mental, physical, or emotional changes. Salivating, feeling nauseous, feeling afraid, right? Sticking your hand out without knowing why. It's like very involuntary, kind of automatic sort of responses that are very physical or emotional or even mental in origin. This one is by far the more complicated type. The other one I think makes a lot more sense. It's much more like common sense. Operant conditioning is something that was made famous by people like B.F. Skinner. Whereas Frederick Skinner or B.F. Skinner. This one is very voluntary. Oh, it has words I can add here like punisher or punishment or reinforcement are the common types of terms that you would see here. Again, it's very more voluntary. It's more by choice. We could say it's based on consequences. If I do X, then Y will happen, right? If I study for an exam, I might do better, right? If I stay out late, I'm going to be punished, right? So this has a lot to do with like consequences of our actions. What happens after you do something? Are you rewarded for it or punished for it? And people can learn all sorts of good and bad behaviors this way. Let's say that you fake being sick and everybody feels bad for you. Everybody takes care of you. You might start to fake being sick more often because you were rewarded or reinforced for it. Or you were super anxious and you went home rather than go to class and nothing bad happened. Now you might feel like you need to go home whenever you're anxious and kind of retreat. You can create these patterns of behavior through being reinforced or punished for your actions. So this leads to more like behavioral changes. Where you make a conscious choice to do something based on the reaction to that event. Is that a? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm guessing it's also like therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be part of it. So this is the behavioral piece of the CBT, cognitive behavioral, and then we can add the cognitive to it to make it even stronger, right? But that's a great example, right? So let's say, like my kids, when they don't fight, like I'll say, okay, if you guys all go brush your teeth and there's no fighting and you get it all done, you can have 10 more minutes, right, of your like technology time before bed, right? And so they will run to the bathroom, brush their teeth, clean it up, everything's like perfect because they want those 10 minutes of like more time on their tablets, right? Or if you guys don't fight, we'll take you out to get Jamba Juice, right? If you don't fight today, right? Those are all like very operant conditioning based. I'm rewarding behaviors that I want to happen again. Or if they don't do it, I might punish them. Punishment isn't nearly as successful. It's always better to reward. But I could be like, okay, well, you didn't brush your teeth. You fought, you spit toothpaste all over the mirror. You're going to bed, right? I cave all the time, which isn't like the right thing to do. But I'll be like, or you can clean it up and I'll let you have your time, right? That's just who I am. But very common to use this, especially with kids. It works with people. We're always conditioning people. Very subtly sometimes. It can also be very blatant. My partner will jokingly say that she's been operant conditioning me for 20 years at this point. Like she'll say like, I'm hungry and I'll get up and go get food for her. Like that took time to condition, I'm sure. I'm the psychology one and she's manipulating me. It's not right. I should be the smarter one in that area, but no. So we can do this to people very easily. We do this with pets. We do this with people. We shape them in the way that we want them to go. Very, very common that these things play a role. And they play a role and shape some of the behavioral therapies that we might do. We want to identify the behaviors that are causing problems and fix them, replace them, right? So if a child is acting out at school, that might be a problem behavior. And then we can figure out ways, how are we going to reward when you do things well or punish when you do things poorly to try and turn it around. There's a couple of these, and we'll talk about these a lot when we get to phobias in a couple of weeks. But we can do what are called token economies, where you get stickers or points for good behaviors that you can trade in for something that you want. Yeah, that's probably very commonly used, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or if you 10 minutes and then at the end of the time you feel okay, you get like 30 minutes play, that's not
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
It's like the biggest dream of the world.
Yeah, it's wonderful, especially for children, right? Because it's so concrete, right? A lot of you, I imagine most of you, if you think back to elementary school, you probably had like a sticker chart or like a happy face chart or like a green, red, yellow kind of thing, right? My kids get golden tickets when they do something good and they can trade them in for prizes. At least my third graders anyway, my fifth grader, not so much anymore. But token economies are when you get points or tokens or stickers for behaviors, and then you can trade them for things that you want, like going outside or a toy or a prize or candy or whatever it might be. Flooding and systematic desensitization are exposure therapies, and we'll talk about them a lot more later. But the idea behind those is if somebody has a behavior that we want to change, we can do it in a couple of different ways. And this is really commonly used for fears and phobias. So if somebody has a phobia of something like heights, for example, we can do something like flooding, where we take them up to the top of the tallest building we can find. They freak out, they cry, they're upset, and it's a massive exposure. Or we can slowly, systematically desensitize them to it and build up to it step by step by step. And again, we'll talk about those both a lot more when we get to the fear unit, but they're very behavioral techniques. From this perspective, we don't care so much about your thinking. We care about the behavior and the response. So this is all about identifying a problem behavior, and then how can we replace it with a healthier or better, like more adaptive one. Very, very, very common. It's very concrete. Different than traditional like talk therapy. You would go in, identify a behavior, and you work toward it. And that's very common in this perspective. Thoughts or comments, stories, questions, anything here at all?
I know I have a buddy that was in Marine Corps and they use like severe, like desensitization therapy to like get him to be normal again. It's pretty crazy though.
Yeah.
It's definitely not legal in like normal civilian life.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, and this is something that's used a lot. This is a very common modality of therapy, and it can be combined, like you mentioned, CBT. It can be combined with that, which is on a slide in a moment too. Right? So the cognitive model, we'll put that up here. The cognitive model. It's all about thinking patterns and expectations. A lot of thinking and cognitions, cognitive thinking patterns. From this perspective, abnormal behavior can result from like cognitive issues, maybe the way that you think about something, or making false assumptions. Very common when people are depressed, for example, to have what is called black or white thinking. Things are either here or they're here, and there's no gray in the middle, when our world is very gray, right? There's a lot in the middle, but people will be like, I either failed or I passed, right? And maybe you don't see anything in the middle. And that's super common with things like depression. Illogical thinking patterns contribute a lot to anxiety, right? What are the assumptions that you have about the world or things that are going to happen, right? And so from this perspective, we try and identify those negative thinking patterns or illogical patterns, and then try and change them. We challenge them, we turn them around in hopes of reducing anxiety or reducing depression. Yeah. Uh-huh.
What about this is based in reality?
Right.
Where did it come from?
I love that. Right. I love that, right? And like lovingly, but jokingly, like it's true, right? Like, so what about what you just said is actually based in reality? And it causes that person to stop and be like, you're right, like none of it. And that might not get rid of the anxiety, because sometimes for people it's so automatic, right? But challenging those thoughts, right? That's the idea behind this, is looking at the thinking patterns. How can we challenge and change them? It's a very kind thing of you to do in a way, right? You're pushing that person to challenge their negative or automatic thoughts. So the cognitive therapies, that's the focus. It's all about thinking, all about changing expectations. What are your illogical assumptions about things, and how can we turn them around? Aaron Beck, very famous cognitive therapist. We'll talk about him a little more in the depression unit. Depression has a lot of cognitive elements to it, but talking about changing faulty thinking. And then we can add, you mentioned CBT, I have it right here, cognitive behavioral model. So that's a CBT. Let's combine these two. It's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And cognitive behavioral therapy, or the cognitive behavioral model, combines both together. So we look at thinking and behavior, right? So what are your negative thoughts and what are the resulting behaviors? And we can change both of them. CBT is probably one of the more common, like popular modalities now, right? It is something that is very, very popular. A lot of therapists use it. Very, very big idea within this, mindfulness, right? If you've ever heard of mindfulness or mindfulness training, that is absolutely popular right now. And it's very cognitively, behaviorally based. The idea is being present in the current moment, focusing on your current moment intentionally and non-judgmentally in the current moment, and not thinking outside of it. Focusing on your thoughts and your behaviors, kind of bridging the gaps between the cognitive and behavioral perspectives. A lot of things like mindfulness training, examining thoughts and how they influence behavior. We're combining those two methods together, very, very popular in kind of a contemporary sense. Yeah.
Because I'm in CPT there.
Yeah.
And she had me read a book called The Power of Now, which is like all about
Mhm.
being in the moment, like not thinking about the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got a tattoo based on the book, but it was like a really good read and it helped a lot with my anxiety and like
Yeah.
calming it down.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like really impressed. And I'm like, I don't really like I was like always like, my family never believes the self-help book. Like,
Right.
why should I get it? Like read it and we'll like bring it in and we'll read it together. And it was like, I guess I'm ready to live it. I was like, oh, I guess that kind of makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
myself thinking about the past or about the future, like I might have a little bit steadier thinking pattern.
Yeah.
And then helping you.
It's a really interesting book. I've read that as well, right? It is the idea behind this is to stay in the present. Because what happens is when you're in the present, if you only focus on this moment, you narrow down the amount of things that could be bothering you. Most of us are focusing on the past or the present, or I mean, the past or the future at any moment, right? Like what's going to happen next or what happened before. And if you can mindfully, intentionally be in the moment, right? And so it'll be little things like focusing on when you're washing the dishes, focus on washing the dishes, be in the now, be in the moment, right? I am literally washing the dishes right now. I am scrubbing this dish and like focusing on nothing but that. It reduces all of the other thoughts and intrusive stuff that might come in. It's a very common like thing, a very common modality. And I will tell you, like, I remember the first time I heard the term mindfulness, I rolled my eyes. I was all like, oh, okay, like mindfulness, it sounds so new agey, but it is a very, very big thing, especially within this cognitive behavioral modality where you're combining the two together. All right, I think what I'll do, I'm going to stop there rather than start in on this and then have to stop partway through. So what we'll do next class is we'll keep going with this. I have some really, I think, kind of interesting clips that we'll watch of people doing therapy from these perspectives. So it looks like the attendance sheet made it over to there. If you didn't sign it, make sure that you do. Really quickly too, I'll talk about it on Wednesday, but start thinking about your character. If you haven't already started thinking about like your movie or TV show character for that paper you're going to write in here, just start brainstorming people and thoughts related to that. We'll talk about it more Wednesday or maybe even Monday. But I'll stop here for today. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I'll see you all on Wednesday. Oh, great. I will take it. Thank you.
This morning, I work at a hospital, so it's like they'll pass me.